My name is also Jordan, not Jordan Valdiviez, Jordan Justice. And so tonight I'm here on behalf, part of the Toledo Bicycle Coalition. And so the Toledo Bicycle Coalition was founded about a year ago, and our mission is to inspire people to ride their bicycle and advocate for a city where everyone feels comfortable riding. And our origin story is a little bit of a bumpy ride. It wasn't really officially a thing for a little while. A couple years ago on Bancroft Street, the Toledo Bike Plan includes Bancroft from UT, does everyone know where that's at? All the way into the Old West End is supposed to be a bike lane infrastructure, all the way down. It's a great connection point through town. And I went to this meeting because I was like, oh, this seems fun. This is the first public meeting I've ever been to where concerned citizens show up and express their excitement for bike lanes, right? Wrong. It was not that at all. It was a lot of people saying, well, like, what? Like, no. And there's a roundabout there, and people hate roundabouts for the most part, especially if you're an American. And so, this thing happened, and I was like, whoa, this is a lot different than what I thought this was going to be like. And I know a lot of people that would be pumped to hear about this plan, and they're not here. They're not being represented. And so there were continuous plans for more meetings and more people, filing single file and telling Toledo government why they hate them. And so we showed up then with bikes, and that second meeting went very, very different than the first meeting. And I think I was surprised how many people came out and supported it, and I think the opposing council member was also surprised how many people came out and supported it. And we hit them with emails after that, and preserved the bike lanes. So there will be, within the next 2 years, there'll be bike lanes from UT to the Old West End, which connect you to downtown. The roundabout got killed, but that's okay. I am a roundabout fan, but not an advocate, I suppose, for roundabouts. So I'm here to talk about what we talk about when we talk about bikes, because I think we have a lot of different ideas. And before we can really talk about what we talk about, I think it's important to establish who we talk about. So if you all think of the word cyclist or someone you probably start to get some images of people, right? Some maybe like this guy, right? It's a cyclist. This is America, even though he's got the Canada flag, it's okay. This is maybe what we think of cyclists, or maybe this dude, right? This is super cool, no helmet, no brakes, because who cares? Or maybe this guy. Bonus points if you thought of this guy. I mean, why wouldn't you? So happy. Or this guy. This handsome fella. If you don't know who this is Morgan. I couldn't resist it. I was like, yeah, he'll be here. So yeah, that's kind of what we talk about. Or there might be more people. These are my two friends, Veronica and Emily, and they're both DC-based professionals, and they both ride to work. Veronica on the left, she has her own advocacy group in Washington, D.C. So maybe this starts to shift the paradigm what we think about when who's biking. Or we have someone like this, going to an appointment or the grocery store or whatever it might be. Or maybe a family, right? Riding down a protected bike lane to go to whatever function that they're headed towards. And so I think that's really important. And there's also another family, the royal family, Beyonce, Jay-Z, and Ivy themselves. It's such a cool picture. I love it every time I see it. There's so much to unpack from there, but it's so good. And then there's this guy again, because I think, that's really important. So yeah, there's, who we talk about when we talk about bikes. And if we start to think about who's biking, and it's not Pee-wee or it's not Mr. Aerostar Helmet, it begins to think about what we talk about. Why would we bike? What are the benefits there if it's not just for this recreational purpose? And I think one of the oldest maybe arguments for a bike advocate is that, it's really green. It's environmentally friendly. Over the next, about 50 years, we could be saving as cities $25 trillion for expensive infrastructure that we don't have to maintain if less cars were there. CO2 would be cut by 10%, and this is all happening by 2050. And so that's kind of an old establishment. It's still true. Biking's really, really good for the environment. There's a new recent study that, again, biking and not eating meat are two of the biggest things you can do to have a green impact. But you might say, well, biking might fall away. Elon Musk is going to save us all from this, so we can keep driving and we can keep all doing all these things, and we won't have any CO2 in the air. And that's really good, but there's this other problem that comes up, and that's called transportation equity. And so interesting fact about Toledo is that 14% of households have no vehicle in our city. And that's a pretty big number. I mean, it's pretty consistent with bigger cities in the Midwest that there are a lot of people that drive. You know, if you look at New York or Chicago, it might go higher, but they have a lot more infrastructure that supports not driving. So for Toledo, this number is really big. And there is a difference, though, of who that might be. And so we have this idea of car-free versus transit-dependent. In December, my wife and I had made the decision that we're going to go to a one-car family. So we sold our one car, and we're like, okay, if we can bike through winter with one car, that's going to be great. And I have other friends that have made this conscious decision to get rid of their car. And it's a choice. They're car-free. And so on the flip side of that, then, there's this idea of transit dependence, where you don't have a choice. You don't have a car. You can't afford a car. If you can't afford a car, you probably can't keep up with the maintenance of it. And so you have to rely on things like the bus, or if you live in a different city, a train, or your bicycle. And we have a lot of this in Toledo, and we don't realize it, and what we call invisible bikers, right? And so people say, Toledo, no one bikes in Toledo. It's like maybe a couple like idiot kids that are like reckless, and they're gonna get hit. But if you look, I encourage you to watch and see how many of these invisible bicyclists you can see, because there's more and more and more. And so I know Dan's here. If you stop by Cherry Street, I promise you will see at least one bike, probably a lot more. And so if we move on then, health, right? If you're going to ride 3 times a week, it's kind of obvious that exercise is good for you. Nate, are you paying attention? Yeah, okay. And so if you rode 3 times a week, you have a 30% lower risk of obesity. You have a 28% lower risk of high blood pressure, right? And so these are all things. This saves money because it saves on healthcare. It saves on all these other costs. And so if you're thinking also about a community that generally, if you associate being transit dependent, there's a lot of correlation then between these different health risks. And so these things are tied into one another. And this is something that biking will not solve. It's not a magical piece of this pie, but it will help. Bicycling can help. So when we talk about bikes, these are some of the things we talk about. And mental health, happiness, right? This guy. I mean, yeah. If you have a bad day at work, you ride your bike home like that, and you won't even remember where you work. It'll be fine. And so if we keep going then, if we think about small businesses like this place, people on bikes tend to spend 10% per month more at local businesses. So it's really important to have bike racks if you own a local business. Is Grant up here? No, maybe someone from Russellville. Grant told me he's going to put a bike rack downstairs. He didn't tell me that, but he should. They visit more often, right? Okay, so people on bikes tend to visit small local businesses more often than not. And then we have they become ride destinations, right? It's like, oh, we're gonna go riding, and maybe we should go ride to get dinner, or maybe we can ride to get ice cream, and all these wonderful things you could do. If you've never rode your bike to go get ice cream, by the end of the week, please do that. It is the greatest thing. And then, so all these things add up to be really good for a city, right? It brings new attraction to the city. It's better for the small businesses of the city. People want to live where they can walk and bike and do all these things. And so Toledo, right? You're all here in Toledo. We're talking about this tonight. And how does biking and what we talk about when we talk about biking fit into that? So here's some the good for Toledo, right? If we're talking about biking in Toledo. This guy, anyone know this guy? This is John Ickes, okay? So this is my friend John. He started a thing called the Toledo Roll. And he was inspired by the Detroit Slow Roll. And it's basically an event where you get together and you ride your bike really slow, spandex optional, probably preferred not, but it's okay. But you ride around the city, probably in a place you've never really ever even thought to ride your bike, or maybe your car, and you just have a really good time. And I consistently have met people on these Toledo rolls that are like, I haven't been on a bike for 13 years, 14 years, 15 years, 20 years, and they are rekindled with this amazing love and joy that comes from a bicycle. And that's all because John decided to go, okay, I'm gonna have a lot of fun in Detroit, I'm gonna start doing this in Toledo, there's some really awesome places we can ride. And so this year, John commissioned some artists and different things, and now they made these art bikes, and they're super cool. So if you see them at an event somewhere, take a ride, get up close, they mechanically move and all these things. So everyone should love those. This is Toledo Bikes. Anyone know what Toledo Bikes is? Yeah, okay, so almost half, I don't know, 30%. Toledo Bikes is a bike co-op, and really, really, really important piece of our biking culture in Toledo. They provide bikes for everyone. So you remember that 14%? and those who are transit dependent, or anyone that wants a bike and doesn't really know what to do, this is a really great opportunity. So if you've never been to Toledo Bikes, head over there. It's right around the corner. Check out their hours. They're kind of funky, but it's great. And so they have this amazing ability to take people through. If anyone's looking, side note, anyone looking for a date night, Toledo Bikes is like the coolest date night, because you can either build a bike together, and that's a great way to get to know someone, like building a bike together, or you could build it for someone else. They donate it and they sell them for really cheap. If you need bike parts or your bike needs a flat, like how many have a tire that's flat right now on their bike? Anybody? Just like sitting in their garage? Okay, that's good. So Morgan could go there. They will also show him how to change it while changing it, and it's super, super affordable. I cannot understate how, it's just a super, super important organization in our city, and it will continue to be as biking grows. So we have a bike plan. That's really good, right? Someone's thinking about it, at least, I think. And so while not perfect, we have a bike plan. More on that later. We have the Chessie Trail. Anyone know what the Chessie Trail is? Okay, this is cool, because this is an awesome, awesome thing that's happening in our city. A couple of years ago, the city and a couple other organizations like the Metro Parks and UT and Wood County Port Authority, and the list goes on, but they had an opportunity to purchase this rail corridor that starts up in West Toledo near Miracle Mile, and then kind of goes through the heart of the city, through two of ProMedica's campuses, through UT's campus, and it wraps around, goes over the river, and ends up at WW Knight Nature Reserve in Perrysburg. I think round trip is like 14, or not round trip, but end to end's like 14.6 miles, and something like 60,000 people live within a half mile of it. And so it will, when in its completion, be a life vein for the city, and biking and walking and moving. You'll be able to go across the river and eat somewhere new and do all these wonderful things. More on that after too, later. So that's really cool. So we could talk about a bad thing. It's not hard to imagine that there's some painful parts of Toledo and biking, right? And so one of those things is we really have this strong, strong mindset of recreation versus transportation, cycling. And so what am I talking about when I talk about that? If you remember this guy, right? So when I'm thinking of like bike riding in groups or encouraging people to ride, I think a few people are generally scared of spandex, right? And then, yeah, they're scared, like a few people. And then when you have multiple people in spandex, I think most people are scared. They show up and they're like, this is my dad's 10 speed from the 70s, and I don't know what's going to happen. But then when you have multiple people matching spandex, it just scares everyone, okay? So this idea of, and there's nothing wrong with spandex, right? Like there are many long rides I've done with like some very comfortable shorts. It has a nice pad in all the right spots. So, when we talk about that, we're looking also at like, what does it look like for you to go get ice cream with your family? Or what does it look like you to run to Kroger and pick up the bread or the milk? Or what does it look like you to ride to work or coffee with a friend or any of those pieces? We still primarily think about putting your bike on a car or in a car, driving it to the parks, riding around, putting it back on, and then going home. And so it's a big shift that we need to kind of keep going and realizing that people want to use these bikes to move across the city. Another bad thing, political will in Toledo is there, maybe, I don't know. Against it, maybe the stronger, but we don't have many champions in council or on the mayor's staff or in different organizations that can really help drive this bike plan. Because, right, it's like, bike plan timeline 2050. I put that date on there, it's not true. I don't know, because there is no date. Like you ask them and they're saying, I don't know, we don't know. It's all about money, it's all about these things. And it's saying, okay, so we need some people, and we're in an election year, people to think about this and actively pursue it. Because there are a lot of things you can do without a lot of money. And so that's great. We don't have political will, we have trouble with recreation, cycling versus transportation. Who knows when the bike plan is going to be finished? So what does that mean? What do we do now? That's a really good question. And so there's this really cool idea that's happening, right? If we're talking about new ideas, innovation, entrepreneurs, and things like that, this idea of a quick build, no cost. And maybe there's a little bit of a cost, but we have to think of how cities view cost and their structure. And so this idea that to do a bike project, to do an infrastructure project, it doesn't have to be permanent. You can prototype it, you can test it, you can measure it, and then you can tear it all down and be like, that did not work, 3 people died, this was awful. Hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully it's like, yeah, people were really angry and that was it. So here's some pictures. This is a picture of a quick build, no cost. Literally, this one was no cost bike lane installation, protected bike lane. And you can see it's like some gates for events and some cones. And they're like, all right, let's test this out, see if people use it, right? Because that's always the argument. It's like, I'll build bike lanes once people start riding. And it's like, but they won't ride if you don't have bike lanes and you don't do that. And so it's a circular thing. And by the way, my favorite thing of this picture is this dude. Still riding outside. He's like one of those hardcore bike advocates who's like, take the lane, this is my space, which I sympathize with him. But I just thought it was funny, you know, these people. And note, it's not just like people on bikes, right? So when we talk about bikes and we talk about reclaiming space, it's not really about the bikes. Who cares? Like yeah, that lady's on her bike, that's fine. So this is another image. This is 6.5 Avenue in New York, as they call it. On the left was what it was like before Janet Siddiq-Khan, who is a transportation planner or head of transportation in New York. She started doing all these prototypes. So you see before and then after. And after, it looks really elegant and really engineered and all those things, but that's just paint. It's literally nothing but paint. So you see, you shorten the space for the people to walk across. They don't have to walk as far. There's only 1 lane instead of like 3.5 parking spots, and there's a bike lane put in, and that was all paint. And paint for a city is like you have Post-it notes at home, right? It's not a cost. And so that's one example. Here's another example of Broadway in LA. Nate, notice there's tables. People can eat. You could be eating outside. It'd be great. And so really you see this extra wide street, not really full of traffic, and they reduced the road diet and they put in some planters and some umbrellas and all this stuff, and all of a sudden you have a totally different street, right? I mean, look at that. Like, if you're thinking of the street space in front, you have your 2 tables, you could have 5 or 6 or more, and it could be extended down. You do get a little increase in like traffic backup time, but it does not affect the overall level of service through traffic. But it becomes a place for all people. There's not even bikes in this one other than on the bike rack. So this is one of my favorites. This is Pearl Street and Dumbo in New York, Brooklyn. And you see this like parking lot triangle thing. And then they take it and they, again, just paint and planters and some umbrellas. And these umbrellas are actually from a restaurant that you can't really see in the photo. But when they started painting it, the city, this guy who owned the restaurant was like, hey, can I like put some tables and umbrellas out there? And they were like, yes, of course. And so it was all quick prototypes, right? And most of these projects are now, if you're going to New York City this year, they would be fully engineered build, and they invested the money in. So now you might have a raised curb instead of just the paint. But it's to show that you can do things without money, right? Like that's the city's biggest thing. It's like, we don't have money, we don't have money. We found a bunch of money, we don't have money, we don't have money. And at the same time, you could do these things without any money. And we have to learn to walk and chew gum at the same time when we're doing things like this. And so, you know, that's some cool pictures. What does it mean for Toledo again? What does it mean for all of the people in this room? So I have a challenge for everyone in this room. In this upcoming week, by maybe next Monday evening, I would love for you to replace one trip with either biking or walking. Your choice. Maybe you don't like bikes, that's fine with me. But during that walk, I want you to survey the space. Observe what's going on and see where we give away space to all these other things where we could claim it back for ourselves, right? And start to think about what that would mean if people were moving and walking around. How many people walk to lunch if you work downtown, right? Right, so you start to know these things, and you can. But how many people have ever biked to get ice cream? Anybody in there? All right, see, that's what I'm talking. So maybe you just do that again. It doesn't have to be a new trip, or go to the grocery store, or if you want, bike to work. I don't really like to advocate for people biking to work. I bike to work every day, but I realize for most people that's like the most difficult trip to change in their rhythm. And so bike wherever you want, but replace one of those trips with walking or biking, and I promise you will start to notice some of these things. And so I think when we start to focus on that and we start pushing towards these reclaiming of spaces, this truth that this whole room knows will become even more true. Thanks, everyone.